John's Mole Man Productions presents Man Getting Hit by Football.
And we're back with some riveting tier list action, this time with Part 2 units. The most interesting and also the least interesting part. What a waste of potential Part 2 was. Such an interesting story dilemma to have like a civil war. It's like the only time a proper civil war has happened in Fire Emblem. And it's only 5 chapters long and it's kind of just resolved. Anyway, let's move on to the first Part 2 unit. And probably the most important story-wise, it's Elincia. Okay, Elincia. Elincia is a very, very interesting unit. She almost falls under the royal category in my eyes, because, well... Okay, first of all, let me try and place her. She's definitely no lower than C tier, but she's also no higher than B tier, I'd say. I'm gonna place her in C tier, but like to the higher end of C tier for now. Elincia is a very, just kind of, both strange and straightforward unit. She joins in Part 2, she is available for only 2 chapters in Part 2. She's available for Prologue and Endgame. Completely unavailable for the rest of the part, and then in Part 3, she's completely unavailable, much to everyone's surprise. She's literally not available for a single chapter, which is kind of a bummer. And then in Part 4, I want to say she's force deployed for 2 chapters in 4.2 and 4.5. Regardless, she has effectively 4 chapters before the tower, which is absolutely dreadful availability. It's even worse than someone like Tauroneo. That being said, Elincia is very, very good in Part 2 when you're actually allowed to use her. Elincia is the first tier 3 unit you get. That's right, you can promote twice in this game. It's fucking wild. I love the introduction of tier 3 units. What a cool introduction. Either way, she starts as a queen, which is a unique class to her. It's effectively a sword Pegasus Knight that can also use staves. It's like a Seraph Knight, but that's also just really good, as it turns out. Being able to use staves as a flyer, turns out, is really, really valuable. You might be thinking, oh, well, you'll be using Elincia for a combat utility, and the fact that she can effectively just one-shot everything with the Amity, because it's a fucking absurdly cracked personal weapon. It's a brave sword with 15 might and infinite durability, which is absolutely goddamn insane. Yes, the Amity is really strong, and yes, Elincia's combat in 2E, in Elincia's Gambit, she's very, very good because she has the Amity, and she will just effectively one-round basically every single unit in that chapter. She almost one-rounds the boss. She almost one-rounds Ludwig by herself, even on hard mode, because she quadruples him, which is really good because her base stats are absurd, and her personal weapon is absolutely wacky strong. In 2E, yes, her combat prowess is really, really good. However, in 2P, she basically does nothing outside of heal, because she's gifted with the ability to use the Slim Sword, which is God's way of just reminding you that better weapons exist. Why they even have slim weapons at this point, I don't fucking know. I don't even know why she's using a Slim Sword. You could have just had the Amity in 2 Prologue and just made it so she starts with the Mercy skill, which she equips later in the game. For unknown reasons, I'm not entirely sure why. You'd think she'd just start with that. It'd probably be a better way to balance her, to be honest. But either way, her combat prowess in 2P is actually really rather poopy. She's one of 4 combat units in 2P, and I'd almost argue she's the weakest, despite being the highest level, which is very strange. Like, the only way she can do anything remotely useful in 2P combat-wise is through stun, which is effectively... Again, if you're unfamiliar with Radiant Dawn, every single tier 3 unit will get a unique skill that is effectively just an empowered crit in some way. Like, stun is the one for Seraph Knights and Queen, which is literally just a crit, but it also stuns the opponent for, I want to say like 5 turns, which is completely overkill. Most of them are completely fucking overkill. There's stuff like Impale or Eclipse, where it's literally just murder your opponent 8 times over as a joke. Dance on their grave for extra fucking style points, why not? But stun can be useful in the sense that it buys you extra turns for the other characters in 2P to actually do stuff, aka for Marcia to claim that she's actually doing something, while Haar murders everything on that map, because he's Haar and he's fucking broken. So she's, like, okay in 2P as a healer support unit, or, like, occasionally stunning things. And then in 2E, she's really, really good, because she's both got access to the physics staff, which is fantastic. I believe she just has an info conversation with Haar that gives her a physics staff. So that's another point for Haar, if you already weren't convinced. We haven't gotten to him yet, but fucking spoilers, he's S tier. She has the physics, she has the Amity, she does a ton in 2 Endgame, and she can be danced, so she gets 2 actions. She's very, 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 very good in 2 Endgame. It's absolutely her best chapter. If it was just her Part 2 performance, I'd probably place her in B tier, but once you roll on over to Part 4 and the entire game, much like with a lot of other units like Tauroneo and Tormod and Morim and Vika, the rest of the game is caught up in Part 4, and enemies are much, much stronger, and Elincia's seemingly good stats for Part 2 are actually really poor for Part 4. I believe she's sporting like low 20s in basically everything. She's kind of an all-rounder. Like, her speed is decent enough to the point where she won't get doubled by much stuff, but it's also not high enough to the point where she will double stuff. Which isn't that bad, because she does have an innate brave weapon that is absolutely fire. It's really, really good. at the same time, she won't be doing much damage because her base strength is kind of low, and like she's not very tanky. Like her defenses are all right, but her base HP is really low. And there's also the annoying caveat that I think every single flyer in this game faces, regardless whether you're a Flying Lagoose or a Pegasus Knight, but not if you're a Wyvern Knight, because they're just not fucking weak to arrows anymore because they decided, nope, don't need that, it's fine. We'll balance them at some point. Every single flyer faces the fact that enemies will sometimes be wielding crossbows, and as mentioned before, crossbows use innate might of absurd caliber to deal their damage, usually like 32, it's like 28 to 36, I think. And this means that when they get effective damage, it will multiply by 3 and become comically high, to the point where they will basically one-shot any flyer. They will get absolutely decimated by crossbows. They will just get flat-out one-shot. And because crossbows have such innately high accuracy as well, I think every single one has at least 100 hit. And snipers and warriors generally have pretty high skill anyway, and biorhythm shenanigans. It basically means if Elincia or Marcia or any of the flyers, like even characters like Nealuchi or Janarth and Olki, they will almost certainly get hit and immediately succumb to the age-old practice of death. Which sucks, considering Elincia is obviously a defeat condition. And I don't remember if she is a defeat condition in Part 4, but she's definitely force deployed, and obviously having a unit die is never a good thing. So she just needs to be really careful in Part 4, because she just hasn't scaled very well. Yeah, I think that's about it with Elincia. She still has staff utility in Part 4, which is nice. That's why I think she's above a character like Tauroneo, who's in a similar situation. They both have very similar power levels in that they don't scale particularly well, but the main difference between the two is, one, Elincia is both a flyer and has staff utility, and two, she is also force deployed, so you're gonna be using her. Like Tauroneo, I don't believe is force deployed outside of like Part 3. I don't believe he's force deployed in Part 4. And like, while her growths, she's very similar to a lot of these. I don't even really know what to call them. I'm just gonna call them pre-promotes, and that their growths don't really matter because they're not gaining that much XP. Like, she'll gain decent XP in Part 4 because enemies just absolutely dump XP on you, for whatever reason, which is nice, but stats don't really mean that much in her. She's basically a staff bot in Part 4, because she is just not good enough at killing things compared to units like Tiban, Naesala, tier 3 units that you put into the Hawk army at that point. For the most part, since she's forced into the Hawk army, she doesn't even get the privilege of being a flyer in something like the desert map or the swamp maps. Or I guess in 4.5 she does. Either way, like, the Hawk army chapters of 4.2 and 4.5 are generally just watching Tiban slowly slaughter everything, because while he has one range, he's virtually indestructible, and will run around pretty much every single enemy in the game, because he's absurd. But yeah, Elincia is really, really good in 2 endgame, and then she's kind of like okay in 2 prologue, and then for Part 4, she's just very average. I think it's just like that. If she didn't have such a good 2 endgame, I'd almost place her in D tier with Tauroneo and the other losers, but I think 2 endgame, it can be kind of a difficult chapter. It's not that difficult, but having a good healer really does help on that chapter, so Elincia is invaluable there. But otherwise, just kind of so-so. Yeah, Elincia, kind of a middle-of-the-road unit. Almost in B tier, I'd say towards the top of C tier. Currently, definitely the best unit in C tier. Next up, it's another flyer! Oh, it's Marcia! Oh, it's best girl! What do you mean there's a pink-haired tomboy Pegasus Knight who's, like, almost kind of British? Wow, where did my trousers go? That's crazy. Marcia, or Marcia, I'm just gonna call her Marcia. Marcia Marcia, in my opinion, is the best unit in the game in Path of Radiance, in my professional opinion. Marcia is absolutely goddamn phenomenal in Path of Radiance. Incredible unit. Flyers are really, really good in that game. But when it comes to Radiant Dawn, I'd almost consider Marcia to be the most, like, nerfed character, so to say. She isn't very good, to put it bluntly. Marcia has a lot of just fundamental issues, so to say. She's just not very good. I'm gonna place her in C tier alongside Elincia. I think I'm gonna place her above her, just because Marcia does have some good things going for her. Or does she? Actually, no, I'm gonna place her below Elincia. Marcia is a character that, upon my most recent playthrough, I actually realized something that part of my brain hadn't quite, realized in a long time, because I thought, until my most recent playthrough, that Marcia joined along with Ilyana, Brom, Nephenee, Heather, all those, like, the country bumpkins. I thought they joined with, like, the Merchants Guild from 3.2 onwards. I thought Marcia joined with them for some reason. I had a forbidden memory and locked away in my brain. It's like, oh yes, this definitely happened. I was gaslighting myself, effectively. But she doesn't. She joins after 3.10 with the rest of the Crimean Knights. Which means her availability in Part 3 is bad. It's not very good. She has basically 2 chapters to be useful, and that's rough. That being said, she does actually have a fair amount of availability in Part 2. She has Prologue, and 3 and Endgame. So yes, 3 chapters, and part 2 generally scatters your units quite heavily, so having 3 chapters available for part 2 is actually pretty good availability, as weird as it sounds. But yeah, let's go over what she does well. She is a flyer. Flyers are pretty much universally good in Fire Emblem, even in this game where they're not that great. I'm talking about like Pegasus Knights and Seraph Knights and whatnot. She's still good as a flyer. Her base stats are okay-ish. She has enough speed to double, I think, I want to say like everything except for maybe the boss in 2P. But the problem with Marcia is just her base strength and her weapon type. Marcia's base strength, I want to say, is like 16, which for a promoted flyer is like pretty gosh darn low. Like 16 strength paired with something like a Steel Lance is only like, I want to say, what, 27 damage or something? And her introduction chapter really doesn't do a lot to showcase her, like, positive side. Because, spoilers, 2 Prologue is completely filled with Wyvern Knights. It's the only enemy type in there. And Wyvern Knight is the best class in the game in Radiant Dawn, which is really rough for Marcia. So it means that she's basically doing, like, only slightly more damage than Elincia for the most part. Which means she's doing, like, 3 times 2, 4 times 2. I think a max of, like, 7 times 2 on the weaker Wyvern Knights. Which is just really rough. She just doesn't do that much in that chapter. She's basically just cleaning up enemies that Haar couldn't quite finish off on his own. Which is fine. I'd say she's the second best unit in that chapter other than, like, the second best combat unit, because other than Haar, I'd say Leanne's the second best unit in that chapter. And she can be useful. And then in 2-3, she's a bit better. But then again, there's always that conundrum in 2-3, and I'm never sure how to feel about it. I'll just say this about 2-3, Geoffrey's Charge. That chapter's fucking dog shit, and I never want to play it. Genuinely one of the worst chapters in the game. Part 2 is an interesting idea for a part, and I do like a couple of the chapters. I like Elincia's Gambit, and I like 2-2, the Fog of War chapter with Lucia. But every other chapter in that part, I think, is actually kind of just poopy doo-doo. 2-1 is a slog, 2P is really boring and plays exactly the same every single time, and 2-3 actively encourages you to not kill units when they will just suicide at you, which is kind of fundamentally just not very good design. But yeah, in 2-3 she's alright, but the enemies in that chapter are purposefully not very strong because the game doesn't want you to kill them, so she almost like doesn't just do that much. And while she is the lowest level in the Crimean Knights, so she's like kind of the best unit to grow for the most part, like outside of like Astrid if you want to be a weirdo and use Astrid in Radiant Dawn, or like Makalov, like Danved, I don't know. Like Geoffrey gains basically nothing, Kieran gains basically nothing, the others basically gain nothing. She's like the only one really gaining XP, so you want to use her, but she just doesn't grow very well either. That's also the case. She's just very average, and I'm actually going to take a quick look at her growths again to remind myself. Holy moly, these are not very good. Wow, these are like Path of Radiance growths. What the hell? They're not good at all. Like, her only good growths are HP and speed. What the fuck? She's got a 30% strength growth? I do not remember Marcia's growths being this poor. Ew. She doesn't even have any skills or like good weapon ranks or good like bases to really compensate for that either. She only has base 20 speed? Are you for real? Oh my god, Marcia sucks. Marcia's not good at all. Yeah. I don't even really know what to talk about with this unit. I think she's a very straightforward unit. Her availability is not good. Or in part 2 she has 3 chapters, and in part 3 she has 3-9, and then 3-11, and then 3 endgame. So she has a total of 6 chapters before part 4 to grow a tier 2 Pegasus Knight that I want to say it starts at like level 5. Which is, if you want to get into Seraph Knight, that's a lot of XP you need to give her. And the game even kind of nudges you away from using her, because, spoilers, they give you Tanith and Sigrun from 3-11 onwards, who both aren't particularly great, but I'd say they're both better than Marcia. Because while their availability is worse, their bases are just, like, leagues better. It's just a very rough world for Marcia. I think being average in Radiant Dawn is generally just, not a death sentence per se, but it just means you kind of get forgotten about. Whereas, like, like, you remember units like Fiona and Meg and Leonardo, because, like, they're comically bad to the point where you're like, oh yeah, I'll use them, it'll be funny. But, like, with Marcia or Aran, it's just like, do you really remember them? It's like, they're fine. If you use them, they'll, like, grow okay, although Marcia's growths are, upon second inspection, are not very good. Her availability is mediocre to just flat out bad. Her bases aren't very good. Her growths aren't very good. Pegasus Knights get absolutely demolished by crossbows. Lancers are an okay weapon type. They're not amazing. The problem is, if she wants to use something like Great Lances, she's actually going to be slowed down by them at first, because her base strength is only 16, and I want to say Steel Great Lance has like 18 weight, meaning she loses 2 points of speed, and 18 speed is not... I'd say that's probably not enough speed to double most units. I'd say Elincia is a bit better, just because when you do get to use Elincia, she is good and she doesn't require that much investment. Whereas Marcia doesn't do that much. She's also just not very, like, good at surviving. Even in something like 3-9, where the enemies aren't that strong, you generally send Marcia up to stop the villagers from burning, but without a reasonable amount of investment, she's just not that tanky, and probably won't survive without constant vulnerary spam or, like, use from the physic yellow unit. Yeah, no personal weapons, no, like, nothing fancy. She just doesn't get a lot of gifts that other characters get. Like, she isn't a particularly good candidate for stat boosters because her stats are, like, very average. Giving her stuff like the speed wing or the energy drop is just not that good of an investment because you won't get a unit that you can use for most of part 3. She's very average. She's not a bad unit. She's just very, very, very average. Probably like the middle unit of the list so far. Play Path of Radiance if you want to see Marcia be good. Kind of as simple as that. Okay, oh boy, Nealuchi. Fun fact, I always forget Nealuchi's even in the game. I'm gonna place Nealuchi in... where am I gonna place Nealuchi? Nealuchi is very, very, very straightforward, and in my opinion, the most forgotten about unit in the game. He's kind of like a Tormod, like a Legu's Emancipation Army unit in that way, and that he just fucking vanishes for part 3. Nealuchi's just not very useful. I'm gonna put him in E tier, I think. Nealuchi is just not very good. He's quite bad. Which is a shame, because he's a fun character in the sense that he says, I'm old, and then he does a little jig. In 2P, he's kind of similar to Marcia and Elincia in that Wither Knights have such, like, strong bulk and HP, and that he just doesn't do very much in combat. And he's almost worse than them in the sense that he needs to use the Legu Stone to be useful. Or, like, I believe he starts transformed in 2P, which means... or that he uses a Legu Stone automatically at the start of 2P, which is nice, because it means he can do stuff right away, but he's not going to do much damage. I think I want to say he does, like, 5 times 2, which isn't great. He has no 1-2 range because of the Legus. He has to use the Legus gauge, which means half the time he's just not fucking doing anything. And that's the only chapter where I really think about his performance, because I don't think I used Nealuchi at all in 2-2 or in 2 endgame. Because Nealuchi, despite being like a reasonably high level Legu, I want to say he's like level 23, level 24, which for that part of the game is actually pretty high level, so he doesn't gain very much XP, alongside the already like huge XP reduction that Legus face. In 2 and 2 endgame, his other 2 chapters, he will start untransformed, and this is a death sentence. I think for most Legus that have to deal with this quote issue, it's not really an issue. It's like getting shot in the fucking leg and calling it an issue. It's not. It's kind of a death sentence. Legus that don't start transformed are so useless in Radiant Dawn because they can't do anything outside of just snorting Olive Grass, and that's not something. Imagine like, I don't even know, what's the comparison? Imagine just a unit needing to like imagine there's a robot unit that needs to turn on, and it takes 3 turns to do so. That's a Legus. Like, Nealuchi does nothing for the first 2 turns because he needs to huff Olive Grass. And if you're using a dance to make him huff more Olive Grass, that's just a waste of a dancer! And what you're getting in return isn't even a very good unit. Like, I'm just gonna quickly look at Nealuchi's bases again, one sec. Let's say you invest really heavily into getting Nealuchi online as soon as possible. What you get in return is a unit with 20 strength, which isn't particularly high, and he doesn't have Essence Strikes despite being an old, like, withered old man. I'd almost say he'd be better if he started with Essence Strikes to show that he's an old man, and yeah, he has experience in combat. So, you have a unit that's going to be dealing 28 times 2. I will admit, Nealuchi's super fast. He has 36 speed, which is, I want to say enough speed to double every single unit in the entire game, which is actually really funny, because this old man is doubling literally fucking everything. And that's his only, like, good stat. The rest of his stats are really, really poor. And while he will double everything, he's just not doing any damage. It's the Vika problem. At the end of the day, doubling doesn't matter if you're doing 2 times 2. I'd much rather have 10 times 1 than 2 times 2. Big number versus do combo. I'd rather have big number. So yeah, Nealuchi is just... he's just not good. It's kind of as simple as that. He has so many weaknesses. The main one is just that he's a Legus, and Legus who can't stay permanently transformed or like have good availability or like bring something valuable like Velug in part 1. They just don't do anything. Like, there are very few just generic Legus in this game that I would consider good. I'd consider Velug good, and I think Janaf and Ulki good, and maybe like Scrimir. And that's kind of it. I'd say every other Legus ranges from poor to just flat out garbage. I'd say Nealuchi does just range to poor. I don't think he's flat out garbage, because he can be somewhat useful in 2P. He's not great, but he's okay. But like after that, he just does nothing. At the very least, he is agile enough to the point where he can maybe dodge tank. His speed is it's comically high. 36 is ridiculous. He will double everything. He's like almost a joke character, because, yeah, he's really fast, but he basically just does nothing because his availability is hot garbage, and, like, he just doesn't do any damage. It's kind of as simple as that. If you want to see 0 times 2 a lot, use Nealuchi. And if you want to see your Lagoo's resources plummet really, really quickly, use Nealuchi. It's funny. Don't worry, give him the Lagoo Stone. Maybe he'll do something. Oh, never mind. Never mind! He's doing 3 times 2 against the Halberdier! Yeah, Nealuchi sucks. Probably the weakest unit in E tier. I'd say a unit like Vika is actually stronger, because at least Vika is useful for 2 chapters! Whereas Nealuchi is only kind of useful for 1, and that's about it. Okay, who's up next? Oh, it's him. It's him. We have to talk about him. Alright. Everyone start rubbing your hands together. I wonder where this unit's going to go. Next up is Haar. Haar is S tier. This does not surprise anyone if you have the smallest bit of Radiant Dawn knowledge. If you have even so much as glanced at a Radiant Dawn playthrough or have, played the game, you will understand that Haar is completely fucking busted. Now, when people say a unit is busted in Fire Emblem, it generally, sometimes it's like overused as a term, like some people call Jill busted in Radiant Dawn. I don't think she's busted at all. I think she's very strong, but I don't think she's busted. She requires a lot of investments to be good, like a lot of resources, and it doesn't immediately start out as one of your strongest units. Now, on the other hand, Haar starts out completely busted. This is the most ridiculous part about Haar. Haar is actually fucking busted. Busted units in Fire Emblem are units, in my eyes, that are units that basically do everything. Haar basically does everything. He is a flyer. He's not even just a flyer. He's a Wyvern Knight. He's a Wyvern Lord. Tier 2 Wyvern Knight, which means he's on the best class in the game. His bases are fucking immaculately good, to the point where some stats basically start capped. Like, I want to say his strength is like 3 points away from being capped, and like his skill is like 2 points away. Some stupid shit like that. Despite being like a candidate who doesn't need bonus experience because of how absurd his bases are, Haar absolutely can bonus XP abuse. And you might even think like, oh, maybe he just has really good bases to compensate for the fact that his growths are ass. Nope, nope, no, nada, no, afraid not. If you were thinking that, you'd be completely fucking wrong. Because Haar's growths are really good as well. They're actually some of the best in the game, for the most part. Like Aaron, he has an absolutely monstrous strength, skill, and defense growth, meaning he is unbelievably likely to cap those stats. And while he does have poor growths in speed and health and res, it doesn't matter. And I'll get into that, why it doesn't matter, very, very shortly. But let's just go over why Haar is an S tier unit compared to all of those other strong units in A tier. S tier units, as I said prior, are for units that are no-brainer units. These units come right, like, just, you open up the fucking tin that says good unit, and guess what? You get a good unit. A unit that doesn't fall off, a unit that basically does everything. They can fly, they can be useful utility-wise, they won around a good chunk of units, and most important of all, this part, I feel like gets overlooked a lot, they're virtually unkillable. There's units like Lagoo's Royals and the Black Knight, who are effectively unkillable. Haar is a regular unit who doesn't have bad availability. In fact, his availability is some of the best in the game. It's actually very good. Haar has such absurdly high base health and base defense, and is stuck on the best class in— I say stuck. Oh, help me, step bro, I'm stuck in Wyvern Lord. He's on the best class in the game, so he doesn't have to worry about dying ever. What is his base defense? I need to go and quickly look at it. His base defense is 23! What the fuck were they thinking with this unit? Base 23 defense is so obscenely high. That's higher than fucking Tauroneo, who's a general, and is designed to be unkillable. That's a unit that's too strong for the Dawn Brigade, so they take him away. So, what does the Tauroneo equivalent in Part 2 do? Oh, he's there for 2 chapters, and he's fucking invaluable in both of them. He's the most useful unit in both of his chapters in Part 2. And he'll join you from Part 3 from Chapter 2 onwards, for basically the rest of Part 3, and guess what? He's the best unit in all of those chapters as well. Best class in the game, access to the best weapon type, great weapon ranks. He has Cancel as a skill, which is always lovely. Cancel can be nice on Haar, although it doesn't help him that much, since he's going to be taking mostly single-digit damage from counterattacks. But what about Thunder Mages? Ooh, if you leave him near a Thunder Sage, he faces turmoil and maybe eventual death. No, he doesn't. Because of this wacky little skill called Nullify. Nullify is a 20 capacity skill that you can equip to a unit that makes them nullify effect damage, meaning that Wyvern Knight's only weakness of thunder magic is rendered completely fucking useless. Now, his base res is low to the point where he will still take a decent amount of damage from magic, and his dodge, or his avoid, generally isn't that high to the point where he can consistently dodge this. So he's not completely invincible around mages, but mages are so infrequent, and their stats are so garbage, and honestly, Haar hits like a goddamn freight train, so a good amount of the time he's like one-shotting them anyway, so I really don't think it's even like a consideration. Another point for Haar in S tier. S tier units are units that you can play dumb with. In like I'm gonna look at all of the A tier units. You got Soth, you got Zahak, you got Nolan, you got Jill. These units are not invincible, and you do actually have to think about what you're doing for the most part. Haar, I don't have to think. I can put Haar on one side of the map with like 20 units, think, yeah, he'll be fine. Whereas if I did that with any other unit currently on the list, outside of the Black Knight, obviously because he's invincible and Nyla, they die. Like, even someone like Tauroneo would probably die. But Haar is so obscene. He just murders everything. Like, there isn't a single... The only bad parts about this character... Actually, yeah, that's more, like, invaluable in terms of information, is let me list the bad, quote, bad parts of this character. Number 1, his base speed is 20, which, despite being very high... It's actually still very, very fucking high. It's not enough to double every unit in the game, and he can fall off or towards late game because his speed growth is quite low. He will generally stop doubling everything and just start doubling some things. Oh no. This can still be remedied by stuff like speed wings, which the game does give you one in part 2, and I always just slap that on Haar because 22 speed I think is enough to double basically everything in part 2. And again, we'll just turn him into an unstoppable whirling death machine. Number 2, bad res and weakness to thunder magic. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you can just slap nullify on him and call it a day. That's basically it. Like, I genuinely can't think of any other weaknesses for this character. Like, his bases are immaculate. His growths are perfectly good. In some areas, they're fantastic. His availability is good. He's hit there for most of part 3 and some of part 2. He has great weapon types, great weapon ranks. He starts in A rank in both Lancers and Axes, so he can use basically everything right off the bat. He can use Steel Poleaxes reasonably well. Like I said with Seth and the Sacred Stone Steel list, some games have, like, a questionable top 1. Or, like, top 3 even. In Thrashia, it's like, who's the strongest unit? Is it Asvel? Is it Safi? Is it Dagdar? But, like, in this game, it's Haar. Like, who the fuck is competing for top 1 in this game? Like, characters like, I don't even know, like Ike? Ike's really good, but he's not top 1. Titania, she's really good, she's not top 1. That's how fucking strong Haar is. Or I can say, top 1, done. If you think Haar is anywhere except, like, the strongest unit in the game, like, I'm sorry. We're playing a different game. I talked about how Nolan basically has Bs and everything. Haar has S's in pretty much everything, and like an A in speed, which is still enough to be absolutely incredible. There is literally no bad part about this character that can't be remedied really, really easily. I'm going to take a character like Fiona, who has so many problems, which can be remedied to a certain extent. Most of them can. But you need to put in a lot of effort and investment to actually make her a viable unit. Fiona basically needs tons of surgery to be a character, whereas Haar just needs a band-aid across his slightly weak speed knee, and he's good. That's Haar. He's got a minor injury, and he's still batting a fucking 1,000. Next up is, it's Brom. Romulus and Remus. Brom is a really interesting unit, or is he that interesting? Brom's kind of a strange unit. Where does Brom go? My opinion on Brom flip-flops all over the place in Radiant Dawn. I think he is a okay unit, sometimes good. And I think he's kind of like, I think I'm going to place him in C tier for now. I think he's a bit better than Marcia, I'd say. Brom is the first general you get access to. He's much better than his daughter for a variety of different reasons. He has perfectly good availability. He's available for 3 chapters in part 2, and or a good chunk of part 3. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. He starts with pretty decent bases. Like, they're not incredible, but like 21 defense, 19 strength is pretty decent. Like, 19 strength is enough to not get weighed down by most axes. 16 speed's also, like, a nice, solid number to the point where he doesn't really get doubled by much outside of, like, Swordmasters, and Swordmasters aren't that common in Part 2. And, like, yeah, from Part 3 onwards, you will face a lot more Swordmasters, and he will get doubled, but I digress. The point is, he has pretty good bases for Part 2, to the point where he pretty much always contributes something helpful. He comes with a Disarm skill, which is funny. The Disarm skill is not a good skill, but it is funny. At the very least, it's a very funny skill. It literally just disarms, it makes it so there's like, I think a skill % chance for him to disarm the enemy and make it so they're not equipping their weapon anymore, which half the time doesn't make a lick of difference because they'll just re-equip it on enemy phase if you attack them on player phase, but if you have a thief available who has high enough strength, you can steal their weapon and make them fundamentally fucking useless, which is funny. I will say his weapon ranks are actually pretty bad In a game where weapon ranks traditionally aren't that important for the most part, I feel like most characters start with good weapon ranks. Brom actually starts with really bad weapon ranks. Starts with C in axes and E in swords, which is like part 1 levels of bad. It means you can only use bronze swords at base, or if you want to like get swords high, you have to get him to Marshal, which is his tier 3 class if you want to get anything higher than a bronze sword, which is absurd. His growths also just aren't very good. They're kind of GBA-esque in a lot of areas. Like, his defensive growths are good, but his offensive growths are kind of just they're just not good. Like 40% strength, 40% skill, 30% speed is just It's not good enough in a game where growths are traditionally pretty high. And because his growths just aren't very good, I always feel a bit gross choosing to invest into him because he doesn't grow very well. I find that Brom's levels on average tend to just be like HP defense, luck, HP defense, luck, res, HP, speed, defense. And they're just so inconsistent and they're just not consistent on good stats to the point where I feel like I'm actually getting a good unit from investing into him. Like, there are other units in C tier where it's like, Edward feels like a good unit if you invest into him. The problem with Edward is that you just have to invest so much into him. Whereas Brom doesn't feel like you need to invest that much into him to get some value out of him. Because Brom just has good enough bases in part 2 to be valuable. Like, I feel like he always contributes something in 2P, 2 endgame, and 2-2. He's genuinely, like, he's strong. He does a good amount of damage, axes hit hard, his strength is decently strong, he's actually pretty durable. I feel like he's really difficult to kill in part 2. And then, come part 3, he just isn't as useful, which is a problem. His growths basically mean that he'll gain... I feel like if Brom gains, like, on average, like 3 to 4 levels in part 2, so he's like a level 5-ish, 6-ish general in part 3. And I feel like on average, outside of HP and defense, every other stat will have increased by like 1 point. Like I say a lot, it's just not good enough. The rest of the game catches up with him and he's just not really doing much anymore. Like, he will get doubled by a lot more units, he's taking a lot more damage, his base HP isn't that high. Like, his strength is good, but it's just very, like, I'd say he's good in part 2 and then just kind of mediocre to almost bad in part 3. Like, I'd say he's a B tier unit in part 2 and a D tier unit in part 3, which is a shame because he's a cool unit. And I'd say he's, like, very heavily improved from Path of Radiance. One of the few units who's, like, genuinely very heavily improved. But yeah, kind of as simple as that, really. And also, like, not to have the thing of, like, well, these 2 units have the same class, so they have to compete. You're gonna fight for my affection and you're gonna like it. But Gatry is in part 3, makes his appearance in 3 prologue, and is available for all of the time where you have access to the Greil Mercs. And Gatry is a better unit. I'm not saying Gatry's like an amazing unit. I think he's a pretty good unit in this game, but he's generally in most areas he's just better than Brom. And it makes it very difficult to choose Brom over Gatry, so to say. Like, again, you can just use both. And Ammonites aren't that bad in this game, but, like, Brom is completely fine. Tauroneo, while bad availability-wise, is still perfectly good as a unit. And, like, Gatry, I think, is the strongest of the bunch, and is honestly pretty good. Brom just doesn't... he's just missing something, you know? Like, it feels like if he joined a little bit earlier in part 3, he'd be good, or like he had more availability, or his level was a bit high. If Brom was like a little bit better in certain areas, I think he'd be like a B tier unit. But he just falls flat. A lot of very small things that weigh Brom down, which is a shame. But yeah, I think C tier is perfectly good for him. He's a very average unit overall. Do love Brom. What a charismatic farmer. Has some of the most baller lines in 2-1. I don't enjoy playing 2-1, but I love the story of it. What a great chapter. Just please don't make me play it. It's really boring. And his other farmer pal is Nephenee! Nephenee is in kind of a similar boat to Brom, in that I'm not entirely sure where to place her. Nephenee, I feel like, is very... Like, again, I'm not going to make a comparison to Edward. Nephenee is kind of in the same boat as Edward, in that she has the potential to be good. And I'd say to a lesser extent, I'm going to place her in C tier with Brom for now. I might move her up to B tier. We'll see. Let me just go over what Nephenee does well first. She starts as a pre-promoted halberdier, which is a decent class. Her bases are fine. They're not great, they're fine. That's kind of my problem with Nephenee at the start, is she's very fine. She's not that great. I feel like a lot of people really think Nephenee is like, oh, she's a fantastic unit, and she does everything, kills everything, doubles everything, is invincible. And it's like, and I want to say 90% of people think this because it's Nephenee and, like, she looks fucking cool. And she is fucking cool because she's a soldier and that don't ever take that helmet off. It's like 90% of her character. And that kind of clouds their judgment. And she is much better on, like, stuff like normal mode because I feel like on hard mode, the problem with Nephenee, in my eyes, on hard mode it feels like she's just shy of being incredibly good. Like, it feels like she is just shy of doubling stuff. She is just shy of one-rounding stuff. She is just shy of being, like, unbelievably tanky. It feels like Nephenee wants to do everything, but she can't do or like excel at anything. Much like, yeah, she's a jack of all trades, master of none. Like her base strength of 15 is okay. It's lower than I'd like. Obviously, it's like, oh, she should start with cap strength. But like 15 strength means she gets slowed down by the Steel Great Lance at base. I want to say by like 3 speed, which means she has 17 speed at base, which is basically not enough to double anything meaningful in 2p. And she'll gain like, I think 1 level on average in 2p, maybe not even 1 level. Like XP reduction hits that chapter really hard. Nephenee's growths are kind of like the opposite of Brom's in a way, in that her speed and skill are both really, really good at 65 and 70%, but the rest of her growths are just kind of middling to just not very good. Like 35% defense and 35% strength is poor. And I feel like Nephenee needs strength a lot more than most units. Nephenee's definitely a unit that could benefit from something like an energy drop, and there isn't that many to go around. There is one in 2 endgame that she would benefit from, but also there's like a lot of candidates that could use that energy drop, you know, so it's kind of being fought for. Yeah, she really needs strength to make it so she can use better lances without getting weighed down, because like a Steel Great Lance is good for her, because obviously if your speed is high, you want to be using strong weapons to compensate for the fact that your strength is probably low. But her strength is low to the point where she's getting slowed down by the Steel Great Lance, and it offsets the rest of her good things with like all these other weaknesses, and it's very unfortunate. I feel like Nephenee is very much like Edward in the way that her first like 2 to 3 levels are really, really important, and will basically decide whether the character is good or not. Much like Edward, Nephenee needs to be able to double to be useful, because she's not tanky enough to be like a fantastic enemy phase unit. At base, she can grow into a good tank, but at base, she's just not tanky enough. She's more oriented towards res, which is bizarre considering it's mostly physical. It's like if I have to guess off the top of my head, it's probably like 85 to 15 in terms of a physical magic split for enemies. It's predominantly physical enemies. There's very few mages. Yeah, no, it really does just feel like Nephenee needs to get very lucky on that first level, get strength, which is effectively in a point of speed because she has to use a Steel Great Lance. It's the only weapon available in 2p. And then preferably a point of speed as well. Like, you have to ask for a lot, because like the chances of that happening aren't particularly high. That's a 35% and a 65%. It's a 100% and 200%, which is effectively a 1 in 2. So it's a 50% chance for that to happen. I probably fucked up that math like 6 ways from Sunday, but it's fine. Don't worry about it. Yeah, no, Nephenee can be a very, very good unit, and I will say she's better than someone like Edward because she doesn't require that much investment, but like Brom, she does have good availability. Like, you can absolutely help her out in that way, but at the same time, it's just like, there's a lot of good units in the Greil Marks, so like, come part 3 when she joins in 3-2, you can bring everyone in 3-2, like, you can literally bring everyone in your entire army, but after that, deployment slots get pretty tight, and I find that Nephenee's really struggling for a deployment slot over some units like, I think I'd rather use Gatry, because Gatry has 1 less move, but his stats are just so much better. For the most part, that 1 point of move, while nice, is not super necessary. I feel like I'd just rather use Gatry most of the time, because Gatry has better bases and better growths, and a better level, like he'll just get to his tier 3 class a lot faster. I'm comparing a lot of units to Gatry, but it's kind of applicable, because Gatry uses the same weapon type as Nephenee and has the same class as Brom, so I think that's completely fine. She can make decent uses of forges, but there is no forge in part 2, so that doesn't help her out at all. So like, I feel like Nephenee's part 2 is just very so-so. She's kind of the opposite of Brom, and that I'd say our part 3 is actually better than our part 2 in a lot of ways. Because by part 3, she will have had some time to grow and potentially gain more strength and speed, and if she can get to the point where she can consistently double enemies in part 3, she's very good. She does consistently good damage, she's tanky enough to not like explode on enemy phase. She will grow very nicely. She has Wrath that can occasionally help her, but it's not that good. I'm wondering if she's B tier. I don't think she is she? I would say Nephenee is a better unit than Elincia at the very least. I'm tempted to put her in B tier, because I'm seeing Nephenee and Aaron in the same tier, and I don't think that's correct. I don't know if she's as good as someone like Micaiah and Nyla. I'm gonna fucking put her in B tier. I'm gonna put her at the bottom of B tier for now, and I'll fuck around and find out to see if she's actually like a C tier unit. She's definitely the bottom of B tier, but if she's in C tier, she's the top of C tier. Let's leave it at that. Okay bases, decent growths, can grow very nicely, but requires a bit of investment, and her early levels are really, really important to see how she prospers. If she doesn't get good early levels, she just falls off really, really hard. Either way, that's Nephenee for now. Country Bumpkin. And last of the country trio, it's the lesbian. Is she a lesbian? Who fucking knows? She shows some romantic interest or like attraction to Nephenee. Maybe she's a lesbian. Who fucking knows? It's Heather! Heather is probably a C tier unit. Yeah, I'd say C tier. maybe D tier? I'm gonna lean towards C tier, towards the lower end of C tier. Heather is very, very straightforward. I'm not gonna spend like as much time as I did on Brom and Nephenee with Heather. Heather is bad at combat. She's bad. She is not like Soth, where Soth actually has perfectly good, or like great combat in part 1, then okay combat in part 3. Heather is bad at combat right from the get-go. She's not good. While she has like pretty good speed and pretty good skill, she's made of paper, and her base strength, I want to say, is something absurdly low, like 14. And she's stuck on the shittiest weapon type, other than Lagoo's stuff, other than the fangs and claws of Lagoo's, with daggers. And daggers, while seemingly good in part 1, because they don't have to face weapon triangle, but that doesn't matter in hard mode, fucking whatever, it really sucks in the long term, because their might is so pathetically low. Heather, in a joining chapter to a lot of enemies, will straight up do no damage. I think she doubles every enemy in part, or in 2-1, but the problem is, she doesn't fucking do any damage, and that's really bad. But you're not going to be using Heather for combat most of the time. Heather is a thief, and thieves are always useful because they can steal, and they can find hidden items, which are abundant in Radiant Dawn. And there are a couple in part 2, which are always good to get. There's a discipline scroll in 2-2, which is always lovely to have. There's coins aplenty. Coins are always nice to make forges a bit better. I'd say she's worse than Soth, obviously, because her combat's much worse. You don't need her for combat as much as you need Soth in part 1. Her availability is perfectly fine. She joins with the rest of the country bumpkins and God Incarnate in 3-2. She does, again, like her combat's basically the same from part 2 to part 3, unlike Brom and Nephenee, in that she starts weak and she is completely weak from part 3 onwards. You can invest into her, but she's a meme unit in terms of combat. If I was rating just her combat, she'd be an E tier unit. But she has thief utility, so she can steal shit, she can pick up hidden items, which is very nice. I forget how many like useful hidden items from part 3. I believe she starts with Pass as well, which is always like a nice utility skill to have. I can't really think of any immediately useful applications of it, like specifically right off the bat, but Pass it's a nice skill to have. I'd almost rank her in D tier, but I think picking up hidden items is obviously really valuable. Like, I like to think of it as, like, Heather and Soth, and I guess Volk as well, when we get to him, are units that will just give you money. And money is always important. Like, even if you don't use the Discipline Scroll, that's effectively 1,000 gold you can just go and pick up. And while every other character can do that, the chances of them doing it is much lower than the chance of Heather, or Soth, or Volk being able to do it. Just being able to get money just makes you a valuable unit. Yeah, I don't even really think we need to talk about much else with Heather. Combat poopy, utility good. Kind of as simple as that with Heather. Forward Heather. There we go. Next up, it's Lucia. It's everyone's favorite. Oh, she's gone again. Oh, she came into the party, did a little twirl, and then she left for 4 fucking days. Where'd she go? Who fucking knows? Oh, where does Lucia go? Lucia is like Tauroneo, but to an even greater extent. Because Lucia is very, very, very good for the time you're allowed to actually use her. It's just a case of the time you're actually allowed to use her is very, 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 very short. I'm gonna just go ahead and plonk her in this... I don't even know. I'm just gonna plonk her in D tier for now. I'm gonna plonk her in D tier. Because Lucia is, at the very least, really, really good in 2-2. Lucia has phenomenal bases for 2-2. She starts with, I believe, like 27 speed or something. Something absolutely obscenely high, to the point where she will absolutely double everything in part 2, if she was allowed to. And like, she'd be doubling most enemies in part 3 with those bases. Like, I like to imagine it's like, okay, what if I could use Tauroneo through all of, like, part 3? Same with Lucia. What would happen if I was allowed to use Lucia through all of part 3? She'd be a very, very good unit. Like, if Lucia was available for all of part 3, the same as the Greil Mercs, like, swap her out for Mir or something, she'd be incredibly strong. That being said, it's literally one chapter. It's literally a single fucking chapter, and it's not a particularly difficult chapter either. In that chapter, you get Brom, you get Nephenee, you get Mordecai, and, like, they can do a lot of the heavy lifting for damage. Like, Lucia is the only one who's going to be consistently, like, I want to say one-rounding things. No, she won't even be one-rounding things, because, well, like, she can use a Silver Sword of base, and her base strength is reasonably high. I think it's, like, 19. It's not amazingly high, and she's not going to one-round too many units. She's not, like, insanely strong. She's not, like a royal level of strong. She is very good. She's probably the best unit in that chapter. But again, once she comes back in part 4, similar to all these other pre-promoted yuppies, Lucia is much, much worse because the rest of the game has caught up with her. And because it's part 4 instead of part 3, it's to an even worse extent. Now, her speed is high enough to the point where she will consistently double most things in part 4, but her damage is so pitifully low that she's dealing like 4 to 5 times 2, which just, again, isn't good enough. And the majority of the enemy roster is made up by like generals and cavaliers and swordmasters and stuff like that. Enemies that either have very, very high defense and high HP or very high speed, so she will not be one-rounding anything in part 4. Meaning that if you want her to be a viable unit in part 4, you're going to need to dump a little bit of an investment into her. Which isn't impossible, because she is a level 14 Swordmaster. So in order to get her to a point where she might be useful, you need to either bonus XP abuse her, or you can just slap a Master Crown on her and turn her into a True Blade, which is completely fine, to be honest. If you're really, like, hungering for good units in Part 4, I believe she's forced into the Elincia army, the Hawk army, then Lucia is a reasonably good pick. Swordmasters are generally pretty good. Her base strength is kind of iffy, but she is fast enough to the point where she basically just doubles everything if you make her a True Blade, which is very, very handy. And Forges can fix her strength problem a little bit. I believe you can forge silver weapons come Part 4, so that is a good way to remedy her strength situation. What else? She comes with Parity. Parity's nice. It's basically a shitty meme skill until the tower, in which case Parity actually becomes very, very valuable. Parity, I didn't realize this until my most recent playthrough. I decided to mess around with Parity a bit because I thought, wait a minute. Parity is useless for the rest of the game because terrain barely exists in Radiant Dawn. But when you get to the tower, terrain actually becomes a massive part of the game because they introduce cover and waterwood tiles, which give you massive defensive bonuses. Meaning that if you have Parity, you can just ignore those tiles completely, which is actually really, really helpful and will help a lot with certain bosses, like Safaran in 4-4 and whatchamacallit. It can help with the Black Knight in 4-2 if positioning is wacky. Stuff like that. It can really, really help in that regard. So there's that, and she gets it for free, which is nice, but you'll probably just remove her and stick it on someone else who can actually use it. I'm not even going to bother looking at our growths. Our growths don't matter. Lucia will not gain any experience if you're planning to use her. If you're planning to use her in the long term, you're probably just going to give her a Master Crown, which means that her growths won't matter in the slightest. The only stat she'll be gaining is from promotion. So she could have a 100% growth in every stat. It wouldn't make a difference because she gains XP so slowly and she's barely in the game. Simple as that. I really do think it is quite as simple as that for Lucia. She's not particularly interesting. She's probably the weakest Swordmaster in the game, I'd say. Maybe. She's definitely bottom 2. Swordmasters are reasonably strong in this game. We currently have 3 in 3 different tiers. The lowest being D. I don't think anyone will go lower than D. Yeah, Lucia is just really good in Part 2. She's Tauroneo. She's Part 2 Tauroneo. She joins a part later. She comes back a part later than Tauroneo. She is incredibly good for her joining time, and then she pootles off into the ether, and we never see her again until Part 4, at which point she has completely fallen off. Maybe not even completely. She's mostly fallen off. She does have a very good base HP total. Her defenses are actually pretty good, which is nice, but ideally you'd want her to be a dodge tank. And she does have the Earth affinity, so she can actually be somewhat helpful in that regard. She can give dodge to someone, but due to the fact there's so few chapters in Part 4, it's kind of difficult to build an A support in that time. But it is possible, at the very least. I think D tier is fair. You could make an argument for E tier, because she is Tauroneo, but worse in a way, because her availability is actually even worse than his. But I feel like when she comes back, she's a little bit better than Tauroneo. Just a little bit. Yeah. Lucia, very, very good bases, but she don't scale very well, and she just decides to, vanish for most of the game, so she's not that great, unfortunately. 2 for 2 on being bad in games. I will say she's better than the Path of Radiance, Lucia. Wow, that unit's trash. Anyway, moving on, we get to another Laguz unit. It's Mordecai. Where does Mordecai go? I don't even know. Mordecai's a really weird unit in this game. If this was Path of Radiance, it'd be really easy to rate Mordecai. Mordecai would be like a nice solid B tier unit, and I think we'd just all call it there. Because in Path of Radiance, he's very simple. Big health total, big defense, hit really hard. Fast, don't need it. I enjoy going at my own pace. But in this game, while he serves a similar purpose, he's also just a very strange unit. I think for now, I'm going to just place him again in D tier. I'm going to place him above Lucia and Tauroneo, I think. But Mordecai is very, very straightforward. Mordecai hit hard. Mordecai take big damage. Mordecai have lots of health. Mordecai will never ever fucking level speed. Ever. And what's made even worse about this is that Mordecai, I want to say, has like a base speed of something like 18 or 20, meaning that other than unpromoted units, he will double nothing. Now, his strength is obviously monstrously high. I want to say it starts at like 28 or 30 when transformed, which is very, very high. And Tiger Laguz hit like trucks, even with A rank and strikes. And if you really want him to hit hard, you can grind him up to S or even double S strikes, because raising strike rank in this game is very valuable as it just increases your damage. Now, I have no issue with using Mordecai in Part 2. I think he's a very valuable resource. He has the Laguz Stone, he has Olivia Grass, but he still does fall under the same issues of Laguz units suck absolute shit in this game, because they're going to be spending at least one turn doing nothing, which sucks. Like, even if you choose the Laguz Stone, which is kind of a limited resource, Mordecai is going to be doing nothing on his first turn. And then after that, he does become a 9-move, point and click, deal like 30 to 40 damage to something button. And one of the few units in 2-2 can actually do like good damage to the generals, which is very nice. Which is good, but also it's also a case of, in short term, he's not great, because if you're playing quickly, he's not going to have too many turns to do things, and if you're playing long term, he's going to untransform eventually, and then you have to go through the whole debacle of, well, am I going to use another Laguz Stone, or am I going to have him fucking chug Olivia Grass, Or will I just use units who always do something instead? Now, like I've said before, Mordecai does have good aspects. He hits hard. He is very, very tanky. Even untransformed, I find that Mordecai is actually really, really difficult to kill. His base HP total and his base defense are high enough to the point where he's still getting doubled by basically every single unit untransformed, and it kind of doesn't matter because he just takes so much of a beating. And in a way, this builds up transformation gauge and raises his strike rank and gives him a reasonable amount of XP. So I kind of don't mind him getting hit untransformed. Whereas a character like Velug, if Velug was getting hit untransformed, he would die very, very quickly. Mordecai has, like, the bulk to really back it up untransformed. Normally, like, naturally, you generally shouldn't be doing this, by the way. This isn't advice. Like, don't do this, because it's kind of a waste of a potentially good enemy phase. Like, while he is locked to 1 range, which sucks, he can still have a reasonably good enemy phase in 2-2, and maybe in 2 endgame. I feel like in 2 endgame, in Elincia's Gambit, a lot of enemies have 1-2 range. Like, I remember there being a fair amount of Javelin Halberdiers and Javelin Soldiers and Hand Axe Armor Knights, and that really sucks for Mordecai. Like, when I think of Elincia's Gambit, I think there are 2 corners. There's the left side of the map and the right side of the map. You send, like, 1 unit. I always send Haar to deal with the left side of the map, because brain dead, no one to thinky. And then I send everyone else to deal with the right. And you generally want, like, 1 to 3 units making a choke point in that little entrance area. And I usually just have Brom and Nephenee doing it. But I just decided to mess around with Mordecai in my most recent playthrough, and I just found that he has virtually no enemy phase, because, spoilers, people just hit him with hand axes and javelins and stuff, and he still loses transformation gauge from that for some fucking reason! Which is dumb! I understand losing transformation gauge from actively engaging in combat, but being in combat where you can't fight back should not make you lose transformation gauge. That's just dumb. Mordecai is very straightforward. He excels in strength and defense and health, and he has smite as a skill, which is always lovely because it's just better shove. It can effectively give another unit +2 move if you view it as in a different way, which is incredible. It's like a celerity, almost like a reverse celerity. Instead of giving 2 move to the unit who has it equipped, it gives 2 move potentially to another, like an adjacent unit, which is very, very powerful. And like, obviously it's not unique to him. You can just remove it on him and give it to someone else who will be perfectly good at using it. Like, I remember I gave it to Boyd in my most recent playthrough, and he was using it quite well. And I'm talking about his Part 2 performance because I'm trying to avoid his Part 3 performance, because his Part 3 performance isn't good. Part 3, he will join from 3-4, which is the Mountain chapter, and he's fine in that chapter. You get all of, like, the Laguz goobers in that chapter. You get Ranulf, you get Lethe, you get Lyre and Kaiser, and you get Mordecai. And one out of those 5 units is actually good. Ranulf is, like, good. And he's force deployed, so I wouldn't even consider running any of the others, because they're just not good enough at that point, and I feel like running more than 1 Laguz unit as a laugh is kind of just, like, actively crippling yourself as a joke, which is always fun. And I've been talking about this, I mentioned it earlier, Mordecai's growth rates for most Laguz units are really, really poor for some reason. Like, Mordecai has atrocious, like, FE1 levels of growth. He has a fucking 15% speed growth. He's never going to level it. And because of how high his stat caps are, like his defense cap and strength cap and health cap, he's probably not going to cap any stats, so you can't even, like, bonus XP abuse him to, like, get him to his speed cap. Even if he does get to his speed cap, it's, like, it's kind of low. I want to say it's, like, 28 or something. It's something low. So, yeah, Mordecai is a weak unit. He's one of the stronger, like, generic Laguz in the game, which is kind of depressing in a way, because he's in D tier, but I'd still say he's stronger than Morim because his availability is better, he's better than Vika because his availability is better, he's better than Nealuchi because his availability is better. He does some work in Part 2, and then he can maybe do a little bit of work in Part 3. He's not force deployed in Part 3, but he can be okay. Out of the 5 Laguz you get from 3-4 onwards, I'd say he's the second best. But, like, by a considerable margin, I'd almost say. Like, I'd say it goes Ranulf, then Power Gap, Mordecai, then another Power Gap, and then the other 3 goobers. He's kind of like Brom, but worse. He's Brom, but he can't fight half the time, and that's why he's a tier lower. He hits really hard, but he's locked to 1 range, and his speed is atrocious, and he just isn't that great in the long term. Simple as. Sorry, Mordecai. You're a lovely character, one of my favorite characters in Tellius, but he's much weaker in this game. Speaking of Laguz not being very good, it's time to rank another Laguz unit. It's Lethe, or Lethe, however you want to pronounce this. I just kind of thought it was Lethe because it was like a play on lethal. But whatever floats your boat. Where does Lethe go? Lethe is a cat Laguz, which I want to say is probably the worst Laguz type in the game, which is very unfortunate. I'm going to put Lethe in E tier. Not quite F tier. I think she's on the cusp of being an F tier unit. I think she's the weakest unit in E tier currently. That's right, I think all 3 of those other units, I think Leo, who's like an early game archer, which tells you all you need to know, Vika, a character who's barely in the game, and Nealuchi, a character who's barely in the game, are all better than Lethe. Lethe is a cat Laguz with not good bases. She's a Laguz with not good base. Like, even all the other Laguz I've talked about so far have had decent bases in some area. Like, Mordecai is incredibly bulky and difficult to kill. Nealuchi is unbelievably fast. Vika is really, really fast. Luke has, like, great half-shift stats and stuff like that. But, like, I look at Lethe's bases, and I kind of, like, wince a little bit. They're just really, really not good. They're just plain old bad. She has base 18 strength, which is low. She has base 24 speed, which isn't even that high. Like, her highest stat is skill, and that's 26, and even that's not that high. Like, yes, it'll make her hit rates reasonably okay, but it's like, it's nothing super fancy. It's just kind of okay. She has the same weaknesses as other Laguz. She has to deal with the Laguz gauge, and that sucks shit. She starts with the Laguz stone, which is nice, but you're probably going to use it on a better Laguz. Cat Laguz are weaker than stuff like tigers and lions and bears, oh my, purely just because they don't hit as hard. And while I would say someone like Ranulf is kind of an exception to that, like Ranulf's a reasonably okay Laguz. He is definitely held back by being a cat though, because Ranulf actually has really good bases. Lethe doesn't. I want to say Ranulf has like better bases than Lethe in basically every single way. And that's fine because he joins later and blah 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 blah. But like Lethe is just, even on her joining chapter, like Mordecai actually does pretty well in 2-2. You know who doesn't do well in 2-2? Lethe. She doesn't. She does nothing in that chapter. I find that the Laguz, you get Nealuchi, Mordecai, and Lethe in that chapter. And I find that Mordecai just does the most because he can at least hit hard and has a reasonably okay enemy phase. Lethe/Lethe/ whatever does nothing. She just doesn't do enough damage. She's doing like 5 times 2 to the halberdiers. And like, I don't even think she one rounds unpromoted soldiers in that chapter. I'm probably wrong and talking shit, but I want to say that's the case. Again, much, much worse than Path of Radiance. She is very, very good in Path of Radiance. Probably one of the strongest Laguz units in that game. But here, she's so weak. She doesn't hit very hard at all. Her growths are just, like, they're fine. They're better than Mordecai's at the very least, but they're still not good. Like, a 50% speed growth is kind of her only good growth. The rest are just fine to bad. Like, a 35% strength growth, a 35... Like, all of these growths just aren't good enough. And she starts at level 21, and Laguz receive massive XP penalties for some fucking reason. Again, no clue. Laguz are already super weak, but they decided to cripple them even further by, like, tampering with XP modifiers and treating them like... I don't even know. I would have assumed, like, a level 21 Laguz would be treated as the equivalent of a level 1 promoted Bjork unit, like a level 1 Halberdier, level 1 Swordmaster. But that's definitely not the case, because she would be gaining the same XP Nephenee would, but she absolutely doesn't. But yeah, she has virtually no enemy phase in an enemy phase focused game, because her gauge is going to deplete, and she isn't tanky enough, and she won't dodge tank. She's just not good at anything. She just doesn't do anything. She's very, very, very weak. I'd almost argue for her in F tier, but I'm gonna just place her on the bottom of E tier for now, because I do think F tier units just have to be that much weaker. And she is okay in part 2. She's not good, but she is okay. She's actively bad from part 3 onwards. She has the same availability as Mordecai, but Mordecai can actually be like somewhat okay in part 3, whereas Lethe is just flat out bad in part 3. She's not good enough. She will be dealing fucking 0 damage in part 3, unless you absolutely grind the shit out of her strike rank, which, again, you know, you could do, but I certainly ain't gonna do it. Not in fast play. Not if I'm playing efficiently. Not in my Lethe time. Not in my Lethe house. Yeah, kind of as simple as that. Nothing super fancy about her. Her stats are just her bad. Availability is middling. Growths are okay. She doesn't have any skills to talk about. Her affinity is whatever. It's Heaven. I believe Heaven is like one of the weakest affinities because it just gives you hit and such like that, which isn't particularly valuable. She gets 9 move when transformed, which is nice, but does a 9 move unit that doesn't really do anything really that helpful? Like, she doesn't even have Canto. Like, even a unit like Vika, I'd say is better, because Vika has Canto, which means, like, she can at least, like, say I'm going to invent a situation. Oh no, I placed Laura accidentally too close to the enemy, and now she's 3 spaces within range, meaning I can't just shove her out of the way. I know, I'll use Vika to rescue her and Canto out. There, Vika has done something valuable. If Lethe was in that situation, I couldn't do that, because Lethe would rescue Laura and then be fucking stuck. It'd be nice if Cat Laguz had Canto as a way to make them a little bit better. You could just say, like, oh, they're agile. Like, whereas Tiger Laguz are more brutish and can't, like, maneuver as properly. E tier. Yeah, that very, very, very simple. Bad stats, middling growths, middling availability, and she's stuck on the worst class in the game. Okay, who do we have coming? Oh my fucking god, it's the Crimean Knights. Oh, I was kind of dreading this moment, to be honest. Alright, Geoffrey! Where does Geoffrey go? You can actively hear me getting more tired as we go along when I go, I have no idea where this unit goes, because welcome to Tauroneo number 8, where this character's really good, in the first part they're in, and then they absolutely just completely disintegrate into nothingness particles for around 2 parts. They come back and they're not good anymore. I don't know. Where the fuck does where does Geoffrey go? Geoffrey is either a D or a C tier unit. I kind of want to place him in C tier, I think. You know what? Yeah, I'm going to place him in C tier. But like towards the lower end of C. He's better than Aran. I'd say Edward's a bit better, I'd say. A tiny bit better. Geoffrey is really, really good in part 2. That being said, he's only available for effectively 1.5 chapters. In part 2, he's available for all of 2-3. It's literally the chapter named after him, Geoffrey's Charge. He's charging into Walmart. He's taking no fucking prisoners. And then he appears in 2 Endgame if you decide to take that chapter really slow, which half the time you don't even need to do because you can just go on 1 round Ludwig with Haar plus Elincia. Now, you will also get to use him for 1 chapter in 3-9 with you have to stop the Manic Soldiers from burning down the villages chapter. I forget the name of it. And he is really, really good in that chapter. He's the best unit in both of his available chapters in Part 2 and Part 3. But that being said, he's just so similar to Tauroneo in that you don't get to use him that much. And that's the problem. His bases are actually, quite good. I want to say he has, 24 base strength, which is astonishingly high for a paladin. It's like Titania levels of good. And the rest of his stats are, completely competent. He's not the bulkiest. His HP is good. His defense and res are good. His speed's maybe a little bit low. It's 20, which means he doesn't double every single unit in Geoffrey's Charge, which can be annoying, but he does have a Brave Lance to make up for that, so he can most of the time one round basically every single enemy in Geoffrey's Charge, not with 100% leniency, I don't think he one rounds the boss, but for the most part, he's absolutely unstoppable in that chapter. And then the 3-9, to a lesser extent, the enemies have gotten a little bit stronger, and the thing with Geoffrey is he doesn't gain very much XP because his level is so obscenely high, even though he does have Paragon. I need to establish this now. Am I going to improve characters' ratings because they join with useful skills? Because I did it with Tormod, and I'm starting to think Tormod should maybe go down, because this is almost not fair in a way. Because Tormod is not a good unit in this game by any means, but he joins with Celerity, so I ranked him higher, and I think I'm going to move Tormod down a bit. You know what? This is unrelated, but I am actually just going to go ahead and move Tormod down. He's here, I'd say. Nealuchi's better than Vika. I'm doing some rearranging. It's spur of the moment shit. I'm allowed to do whatever I want. But anyway, yeah, Geoffrey has Paragon. You can't take it off him in Part 2, but you can take it off him in Part 3, which you absolutely should do, because it's a Paragon scroll, and that's always lovely to have. You can grind whatever unit you want. Favoritism, at your disposal. That's what the Paragon scroll is. It doubles XP, flat out. Just fucking level whoever you want. It's lovely. Now, he doesn't actually make particularly good use of Paragon, since he'll be gaining 2 XP instead of 1, after he slaughters a bunch of innocent vigilantes, so feel free to take that off him. Geoffrey's growths aren't, anything fantastic either, for the most part. To my recollection, it's mostly 40s, and I want to say 50s to 30s in most areas. He'll probably gain an average of 3-stat level ups of HP, strength, skill, HP, defense, speed. He's very, very average for the most part. His stats are really, really good for Part 2, and then pretty good for Part 3, and then okay for Part 4, without any investment, which is fine. When he rejoins in Part 4, he joins really late in Part 4. He's unlike most units in the game, where he joins from the start of Part 4, he joins basically at the end of Part 4 in 4-5. So he gets 1 less chapter in Part 4 than everyone else, which again hurts his availability. And he is okay in 4-5, he's fine. It's a swamp map, which is cumbersome, which means he doesn't get to do very much, but he's okay. And again, you can slap a Master Crown on him, and he will just become a reasonably okay unit for 4-5. But that's kind of it. He is just pretty good for his chapters. I'd say he's a little bit better than Tauroneo, because like I mentioned with Tauroneo, Tauroneo just gradually gets worse as the game goes along, whereas Geoffrey gets less gradually worse. I'd say Tauroneo goes from a 9 in Part 1 to a 6 in Part 3, and then a 4 in Part 4. Whereas Geoffrey goes from a 9 in Part 2 to an 8 or a 7 in Part 3, and then a 5 in Part 4. Despite having less chapters than Tauroneo, which I think is a remarkable feat, and also his class is better. As Cavaliers and Paladins have been nerfed reasonably heavily in Radiant Dawn due to the movement penalty indoors, which Geoffrey never has to face, thankfully, and also just kind of low-ish stat caps. But they still have Canto, they still have high moves, they're still pretty all-round good classes, even if they do have weaker aspects. And stat caps don't really affect Geoffrey that much. Geoffrey's very similar to a lot of other units where it's your growths aren't really that important, you're not going to be seeing that many level ups. Lancers are a good weapon type. I actually don't believe you get access to a forge at any point with the Crimean Knights, which can be annoying. But I just think that ultimately he's a very simple unit. While his availability is awful, it's some of the worst in the game, he is good for the chapters he is in. And I think he appears just enough, in my opinion, to place him above a unit like Tauroneo. Just enough, ever so slightly. Like I said, there's absolutely a case for him to be made to put him in D tier. basically he's a slightly better version of Tauroneo in my eyes. And that is valuable. He's a unit that requires basically no investment to do good work, and that is nice at the end of the day. And he comes with a Paragon Scroll, which is always lovely, because it means I can stick it on my favorite Leonardo, or my favorite Meg, or my favorite Fiona, and watch them grow into a slightly less terrible unit. Anyway, yeah, Geoffrey, very, very simple. Let's move on to another Crimean Knight. It's Kieran! Would you believe it? Kieran is also going in C tier. Oh god, the Crimean Knights are so fucking boring. Like, I get it, you wanted to place all the Cavs into one team to, like, fill the, whatchamacallit, the role of the Crimean Knights. Oh, the noble cavalry charging forward for Mother Country, or Mother Elincia. But, goddamn, it makes the army pretty boring when all of your units are the exact same class. It's like I'm playing 3 houses. There we go, I got my 3 houses quota. It has been 0 seconds since I shat on 3 houses. Anyway, Kieran is very, very straightforward. He is an Axe Cav, or an Axe Paladin, I guess, meaning he has access to the best weapon type in the game, which is always lovely. And he does have the caveat of having more availability than Geoffrey. All of the other Crimean Knights, like Makalov and Astrid and Danved, have much better, or, quote, much better availability than Geoffrey, because they get a big whopping, 3 more chapters than him? They get what? They get 311 and 3 endgame, and then their respective part 4 chapter, depending on which army you place them in. Wow, 3 chapters, that's so much better. And that's good, I guess. His availability has gone from, like, Geoffrey's availability is like a E rank character, whereas Kieran's availability is like a D rank character. Let me just go over what Kieran does well right off the bat. He's a very all-roundy goody boy. He has reasonably good stats in pretty much every area. His base health is respectable, his base strength and speed and skill and defensive are all respectable. He's pretty difficult to kill, which is good considering he's a defeat condition in 4-3 for some reason. It's very strange. And that's all fine. He has the gamble skill, which is nice because it's completely useless and will be sold for, I think, 500 gold, so kudos, you are worth that much money. Kieran is really, like, straightforward, and there isn't a whole lot to talk about. I feel like this is the way with a lot of the Crimean Knights, and they're just not very interesting units. He's both not the best Axe Paladin in the game, because Titania is leagues better than him in both stats, growth, and availability. I'm trying to think of what Kieran does, like, particularly well, because I feel like in Geoffrey's charge, he's just very overshadowed by the titular character himself. Geoffrey's just better. Geoffrey's stats are better, he performs better. And now I'm going to move on to what Kieran doesn't do well, which is kind of like everything else. Kieran is very like I said, it's like, yeah, he's an all-rounder unit. Bad parts, he's an all-rounder unit, which means he doesn't excel in any area. Kieran's stats are very, very unimpressive. Like, 21 strength is fine, but for an Axe user, it's actually not that high. Like, I feel like Kieran is always just shy of doing enough damage to where I'm like, oh, that was a healthy contribution. I feel like he's just one of those units, like a Nephenee, where it's just like, just short, you know? And 20 speed is in that really annoying section where he is always just shy of doubling things, especially in Geoffrey's charge 2-3. It always feels like Kieran doubles nothing in that chapter. 20 speed is so annoying, because I feel like if it was like 21 or 22, it'd at least double like unpromoted units. But he just doesn't double anything that meaningful. If he's doubling a unit, it means that other units will also double them, and he's not actually contributing anything specific, because, spoilers, the rest of the units in that army, like Marcia will be doubling units he doubles as well. Danved will be doubling units he doubles as well. Maybe even Makalov will be doubling units he doubles as well. And Makalov starts slower. Like, he's just very unimpressive. That's kind of it. There just isn't that much to talk about. Like, his affinity is whatever, his skills are whatever, his weapon type is good, his class is decent with Gold Knight promotion. Soul is a good promotion skill. Everyone gets a promotional skill, and Soul is probably one of the best ones, because it's just a crit that also heals you, which is always lovely. Yeah, no, he's just, he's fine. It's really difficult to, like, recommend investing into someone like Kieran in comparison to someone like Titania, so to say. Like, again, you can use both, but Titania is basically just better in every single way. Like, I don't think Kieran has any stats that are higher than Titania's outside of HP. And, like, I feel like HP with Titania is never that big of an issue. Like, it's annoying, but it's not. What are his growths, actually? I don't remember Kieran's growths. Let me take a look at them. They're fine. They're not terrible. A 60% strength and 60% defense growth is actually pretty nice. He'll grow quite nicely in those areas. 75% health is also quite good. He'll grow really, really nicely in his strength and defensive areas, but 30% speed is incredibly rough, which means his disappointing speed is always going to be at 20. And I know I talked about how Haar was like, oh, Haar's base speed at 20 is fucking cracked. And it's like, well, now I'm talking about Kieran, it's like 20 speed isn't good enough. Remember, the game scales, and like the enemies in 2P are much slower than the enemies in, whatchamacallit, 2-3, for example. I just feel like Kieran is always just shy of doubling. Like, Haar would be much worse in my eyes if he joined in 2-3 instead of 2P. Because 2P feels like a chapter that is made for Haar. Whereas 2-3 feels like a chapter that is made for Geoffrey. It feels like Kieran just doesn't do a whole lot. It feels like that chapter is just Geoffrey running to the end as soon as possible to try and get as much bonus XP as possible. It's just not a very interesting chapter, and it's a really bad first impression for Kieran. And then his next impression is the chapter where he joins halfway through and he does absolutely fucking nothing in 2 Endgame. And then 3-9 comes around and he's like okay there. He doesn't double a single thing in 3-9, maybe like the soldiers that burn down the houses. And then once he rejoins once the Crimean Knights converge onto the Greil Mercenaries, he does this magical thing called getting benched, and we never see him again. It's this weird thing, happens to like half the units in the game. Like, that's the problem with most of the Crimean Knights, is that by the time you get them in the Greil Mercenaries, you've already trained most, if not all, of the Greil Mercenaries, to the point where they are just better. Like, Oscar will be better. Just for like class comparisons, Oscar will be better. Titania will be better. Even just like other units, like if you train Boyd at that point, he'll probably be better as well. That's the problem with Kieran. He just gets one-upped by so many units due to his shitty availability and just lackluster performance in chapters and just not really offering anything that other characters don't do better. But again, I'm placing him in C tier because, well, I say like, he doesn't double very much and his strength is like okay. He's still an okay unit. I'm perfectly happy placing him with his bro Geoffrey, and like Marcia and Brom and all these other units, because he still does have an adequate performance. He's not a unit I'm like, I don't even know, angsty against, so to say. Like, he does still have a reasonably good performance. Next up, we have... Oh, this will be an easy one. Alright, sick, Astrid. Astrid's an F tier unit. That was easy. Alright, welcome to F tier, Astrid. Enjoy your stay. Maybe the most, no, is she the worst, like, whatchamacallit, what's the opposite of improving? Like, there's a lot of units who've improved from Path of Radiance to Radiant Dawn, like Mia, and, like, Rolf, and Shinon, and Gatry, and there's a ton of units that are just much better going from game to game, and I feel like Astrid's the total opposite, where she's so much worse than she is in Path of Radiance. They decided to shit all over Astrid and make her one of the worst units in the game. For starters, I won't, like, dumpster on what's actually wrong with Astrid for the start, I'll just dumpster on what she does terribly first. Her availability is the same as Kieran and Geoffrey's, but the difference being that Astrid is available for the same number of chapters, but basically does nothing in those chapters. Because, okay, we actually did very quickly get onto the big issue, crosses arms, my first owner crosses his arms, the big issue with Astrid. We need to talk about Astrid. Here is my 4-hour video. It actually is 4 hours this time. Astrid's biggest problems is that I want to say she has maybe the worst bases in the game, relative to like her class and level. Astrid's bases are so fucking atrocious, it genuinely feels like someone at Intelligent Systems despised this poor paladin. She starts with 13 strength as a promoted unit. Like, how? This is insanity. It means she must have promoted at 10 with like, what, fucking 11 strength or something? Like, before promotion, her stats must have been fucking abysmal. And here they're even like, oh god, they're so bad. 13 strength, 15 speed, 10 defense, only 33 health. She's so squishy. She doesn't double anything because 15 speed is like genuinely atrocious. This is like worse than some Laguz's untransformed. Like, I want to say Janaf and Ulki have higher stats than Astrid before transformation. And it's so bad. Like, I think Janaf has like 16 speed untransformed. And he has better availability than Astrid, for fuck's sake. Like, he'll join the Greil Mercs earlier than Astrid. It's insanity. Astrid basically only has 1 chapter to grow. Which, spoilers, she won't be growing very much. Because her growths are bad as well. Astrid's growths are really bad. Her only good growths are luck and resistance, which are the exact stats you want on a paladin. I believe those are the 2 most valuable stats. +1 avoid and +1 or -1 damage from a weapon type that is barely used by the enemy. Her other growths are just poor. Like 30% defense is bad, 40% speed and 40% strength is bad. She just levels so poorly. I find that Astrid, on average, will get 2, maybe 3 stat levels if she's lucky, and it's just not good enough. That's the fucking phrase of the day, everyone. It's just not good enough. But extra so for Astrid. She turned into paper that was just missing half of the words, whereas at least everyone else finished the fucking essay. Yeah, no, it's very, very simple with Astrid. Point 1, bad availability, same as Geoffrey and Kieran, but at least Geoffrey and Kieran do stuff in the chapters that they are force deployed in. Like in 3-9 and 2-3, Kieran and Geoffrey are both useful characters. Geoffrey can solo those chapters if he wants to, and Kieran can at least put up a good performance, and Kieran has better availability than Geoffrey. Whereas Astrid does fucking nothing in 2-3. She doesn't double a single goddamn thing outside of maybe like unpromoted fighters on normal mode, I think, and she will get absolutely decimated by enemies who are designed to be weak. That's the funniest part about 2-3. Those enemies are designed to be weak. and Astrid isn't doing shit. Astrid has been introduced to a bunch of disabled and crippled units, and she still can't shoot a non-moving target. That soldier is in a wheelchair, and you are failing to deal any meaningful damage. What the fuck do you call that 6 damage? Where's the ×2? This unit's so fucking bad. I always forget. It's so sad, because I'm always like, oh, I love Astrid, what a cool character. Bow Paladin, cool idea. I always love bow cavalry. And then you get her, and she's so fucking atrocious. Like, yes, Silver Knight's an okay class if you manage to, like, feed her 1 billion levels and watch her speed level, like, twice. That's fine. Because it can get to 34 speed, which is the magic number with White Tide and blah 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 blah. None of that shit matters. This unit's fucking awful. Don't invest into this unit. She has Paragon. Take that shit off immediately once you get to 3-9. And slap that on a unit who'll actually benefit from it. Like, slap that on your favorite unit. A unit you know will grow nicely. Take it off of Astrid and stick it on Aaron once you get control of the Dawn Brigade, because you like Aaron. Aaron's a fun unit to raise. Or Edward. Or like Zahak. Or Jill. Plenty of units that you could use. That is better than Astrid. And she can't even use fucking crossbows because she's on a horse as well. She has Canto. That's like the best part of her character. She has Canto. Woo! God. Yeah, no, she does nothing. She can do minimal chip XP in both of her available chapters before she rejoins the Greil Mercs. And by the time she rejoins the Greil Mercs, she offers nothing. Like in Path of Radiance, skills are kind of fucky. I don't know exactly how skills work in Path of Radiance. Every time I like try to be like, oh, I'll take this skill off and put it onto someone else, and then I remove the skill and it just fucking vanishes. So maybe I need to do more homework on that, but it feels like Paragon is hers in Path of Radiance. And if it was hers in this game, I'd rate it a lot higher. I'd rate her a lot higher because she's like, oh, it's innate to her. Whereas now I can just take it off her and make any other unit level quicker. Meg at least turns into a funny unit because she will like become reasonably quick. And Fiona, yeah, you know what? I think Fiona is unironically better than Astrid. Purely just because Earth Affinity is so fucking busted. Like, you can go Earth and make Fiona actually pretty good. And it's a lot easier to baby someone like Fiona, in my opinion, just because she gets earlier access to the power. Like, I'm not saying Fiona's good by any means, but I think she's a bit better than Astrid. Like, she has a better weapon type. Astrid has no enemy phase whatsoever. Because she has no access to 1-2 range bows, because she can't use crossbows, because, I don't know, crossbows plus a horse is too difficult to figure out, I guess. Jesus Christ. I'm so angry at this unit. She's so bad. If it wasn't for a certain other little minx, this would be the worst unit in the game. I'm moving on. Astrid, F tier. Doesn't belong anywhere else. Which leads me on to Makalov. God, the fucking Crimean Knights are so dull to talk about. It's the sword cab. It's the guy who uses a different weapon type compared to the other person on a horse. Makalov gets shit on by the community a lot, mostly because of his character, which is completely justified, because he is a shithead. But Makalov as a unit, I feel like gets unjustifiably poo-pooed on for no real good reason. I think Makalov is a perfectly fine and adequate unit. I always see people put Geoffrey and Kieran in like the middle of the pack and then Makalov towards the bottom, and I genuinely don't know why. Makalov, in my opinion, is he C or D tier? I'm gonna place him in I'm gonna place him in C tier. I think he's the worst of the non-Astrid calves, non-Astrid and Fiona calves, but I do still think he's a perfectly, like, fine unit. Makalov has pretty poor bases. I want to say that's, like, the weakest part about Makalov, is that his bases aren't very good. Like, I want to say he has, like, 19 speed, 19 strength. Like, he's just not very good at the start, and that's his biggest issue. That and the fact that he is locked to swords until promotion, which is rough, but I feel like people, like, sword lock in a lot of other games is, like, crippling. It's like the death of a character. It's why a character can be bad. But in Radiant Dawn, you do have access to wind edges pretty much all the time, and wind edges, while not particularly good, it does give you a 1-2 range option at all, which is always nice. So I'm not going to say no to that. Now, what I do like about Makalov is he's still a cav, and cavs, well, again, while not the best, are still pretty good. Like, what? They have, like, 8 move, 9 move at the start, and that's great. He gets access to Soul upon promotion, and Axes, which is great. He gets access to a much better weapon type. C rank, which isn't the best, but you can still level it a reasonable amount. He's a unit that can use the Alundite, which is kind of meany, but it's worth noting, I guess. He doesn't use it terribly. And his availability is the same as the previously mentioned Astrid and Kieran, in that it's kind of fine. It's not great. I think out of all the non-Astrid calves, I would say that he is the weakest of those units. Like, he's weaker than Kieran and Geoffrey and Marcia, for sure. Yeah, maybe he's D tier. Maybe he's D tier. Doesn't join with any particularly good skills either. We'll see. I'll see how I feel at the end. Currently, he's like towards the bottom of C tier, or bottom of C tier, like top of D tier. I think the best part about Makalov is that he does actually have pretty decent growths. He has, I believe, the highest speed growth in the game at 75% for some reason. Like, his speed growth is absolutely cracked. which is funny, which means he will almost definitely cap speed before promotion, and he will almost certainly cap speed upon getting to Gold Knight. And maybe it's just recency bias, because in my most recent playthrough, I used Makalov because I was curious. From 2.9 or 3.9 onwards, I took Paragon off of Geoffrey or Astrid or whatever. I used Calill and Makalov, and I slapped Paragon on both of them for 3.9 and tried to use them as much as possible. And like, he's fine. Like, honestly, his stats aren't even that much worse than Kieran's, I'd say. I'd say they're obviously weaker, like they're around 2 points lower in every area, which on paper sounds awful. Because on paper that sounds, oh, like he doubles nothing, which is true. Admittedly, he doubles absolutely nothing in 2.3. His performance in 2.3 is probably his worst part. But I do think he grows a bit better than Kieran just because he's faster. And again, speed is very, very valuable in Radiant Dawn, because if you can consistently double things, and I do believe Makalov is a, like, kind of consistent doubler. He's not like a Mia or is a Hark level consistent doubler, but he can get to a point where he can consistently double. I'm putting a lot of ifs, ands, or buts in this character. I'm not comfortable putting him in C tier anymore. I'm gonna put him towards the top of D tier, I think. Yeah, I don't feel comfortable putting this unit in C tier anymore. He's not as good as Geoffrey and Kieran, purely just because he isn't as good. He doesn't have as good of a start as they do. I think he's the top of D tier. Like, he's still a decent class. I don't think he's nearly as terrible as everyone says he is. I don't think he's a terrible unit by any means. But he does have his fair share of weaknesses, with the main one being that he has a very poor start. His bases aren't very good. His availability is poor. You will join at a point where you're wondering, why would I use this unit? I have plenty of other good calves, and calves aren't that amazing to begin with. He can't interact with ledges at all. He gets indoor movement penalties, yada yada yada. We've gone over all these points already. No skills, no real utility. Thunder is an okay affinity. I think it gives crit. Crit is fine. It's like okay on some characters, but I'd rather have something like Earth or Fire. Yeah, I'm actually souring on Makalov. I think he can perform well if you invest into him, but he does require a lot more of an investment than a unit like Kieran, so to say, just because his level is lower, his weapon type is worse. His growths are, like, pretty good, but they're not, like, astonishingly good. Maybe if Paladin caps were a little bit higher, I'd say he's C tier, but there's just a lot of tiny things that I think drag him down to D tier. That and the fact that you can't forge wind edges for some fucking reason. Even though you can forge hand axes and javelins, you can't forge wind edges for some reason. Come part 4, which always bothered me. No idea why they do that. For some reason, swords always just have to be the weakest weapon type, unless it's FE4, in which case they get to be the best ones, and never again. Yeah, I think that's about fair for Makalov. He's like, if Kieran's like a character with mostly B's and C's, held back by the fact that he is ultimately just kind of unavailable and outclassed by a lot of other units, Makalov is like, basically in the same category, but he's like C's and everything, and it's a question of why would I use this unit when a lot of other units just do what he does, but better. Like, movement isn't that necessary in this game. Canto is always lovely to have, especially when it's cracked Canto, like Tellius Canto. I think being able to Canto in the tower is very, very helpful, because I feel like taking down some bosses can take, like, a multitude of different units, and sometimes you can actually just run out of positioning spots, so having Canto can help out there a lot. Like, it can make really good use of stuff like White Tide and Blood Tide in endgame, I found, because he was the only cav I was using, so this isn't exclusive to him. This is with every unit with Canto. But it's nice. Like, you can set up, like, 2 good Blood Tides and a White Tide, specifically to take down Sephiran, or Ashura, slash Auras, slash whatever. And he can move in, do his attack, and move out, and then someone else can get the same benefit. But you can also do that with units like Tiban and Titania, and units that are just generally much better. So it's not an exclusive point to Makalov. I'm just making that clear. Yeah, I think he's D tier. I think, yeah, he gets shit on a lot, but I don't think he's, like, terrible. He's a decent unit. Also, why does he not? He's a fucking gambler. Give him the gamble skill. I don't understand. Just give him gamble. Where is my ludonarrative dissonance? How fucking dare you, intelligent systems? Okay, moving on to another Crimean Knight. Oh, goody, he's not fucking mounted. That's something. At least he's a different class. Danved! I feel like Danved gets we just did this. Hey, I've seen this one. Danved gets similarly kind of unjustifiably shit on, like Makalov. I think he's a very similar unit to Makalov in that his bases are ultimately not that impressive. I think I'm going to place him in the same tier as Makalov, though. Just very close to Makalov. A very similar unit. He's fine. He's not terrible. I feel like D tier is just for units that are fine. Like, they're not awful. They're just weaker than C tier. C tier is like okay units. D tier is like just below average. Like units that can perform, but they require a good amount of investment, or their availability is bad, stuff like that. Danved is just a very, very simple unit. He's a halberdier, but unlike Nephenee, who at the very least has good availability and the potential to grow into something very, very strong if you invest reasonably heavy into her, Danved doesn't really grow that well, I find. Like, his growths aren't particularly great. looking at them now, yeah, they're just very, like, okay. 45% speed, 40% strength, 45% defense. They're fine. He just doesn't really impress in any aspect. Like, I think of other halberdiers. I'm just gonna directly compare him to Aaron and Nephenee. Aran is the slow one, Nephenee is the fast one. So you'd imagine Danved would be more of an all-rounder, but it doesn't really feel like that. I'd rather him have like 50% in almost every area, but he kind of just doesn't for the most part. It just feels like he almost has pre-promote. He's got quote pre-promote growth, and that are just generally a bit lower than everyone else's. So compared to a unit like Aaron, who can grow into like a really good Juggernaut style character who won't double, but at the very least he'll be super bulky and hit really hard, whereas someone like Nephenee will grow into a very quick unit, and while strength might be somewhat questionable in certain areas, you can compensate for that with forges and just great weapons, like the Steel Great Lance or the Brave Lance or stuff like that. Whereas Danved just suffers. Like, if Danved was a better unit than Nephenee and the other one, Greenhead Magoo, I'd say he's like a C tier unit. Because at the very least, when he rejoins your main army in the Greil Mercenaries, he'd at the very least be like a contender. Like, imagine if his bases were +2 in every set. I'd say, oh, this is a contender for Nephenee because his bases are better, but he has had less time to grow. You know, something like that. But his bases aren't like higher than Nephenee's to the point where he's amazing. Like, his base speed is a bit higher, his base strength is a bit higher. Everything's a bit higher, but it's not higher enough to the point where I'm like, this unit is good. And if he had better availability, I'd say he's C tier. Again, same deal as Makalov. I think the biggest killer here is just his availability is bad. Availability bad. That's the name of the game, everyone. That's Radiant Dawn. Sorry, your stats are perfectly, like, alright. Your growths are, like, fine. You don't have any skills to speak of. Sentinel's an alright class. Impale is a ×4 crit, which most of the time is super overkill. I think D tier is perfectly respectable for a unit like Danved. He has his time to shine. Does he have his time to shine? I don't even know. He's fine. Availability bad, and otherwise he's just kind of average. Like, he's not even like Geoffrey, where it's like, oh, really strong unit, but terrible availability. Or Tauroneo, like, Tauroneo is just the comparison unit. Or like Kieran, who's like perfectly decent, but just gets outclassed by a lot of other units. Or Makalov, who at the very least can become pretty good with investment due to having good growths in certain areas. Danved's just very average. He'll turn out okay. He's just kind of unimpressive, and that's ultimately it. Doesn't contribute anything skill-wise. Utility is reduced to shoving, and while shoving is always helpful, it's not the end-all be-all. It's not just the most important thing ever. He's just not. He's just not that good. He's just very average. That's the unfortunate truth. Alright, the final Crimean... is she even a Crimean knight? She belongs to Crimea. That's close enough. You look like a knight. Good enough. Get in. Alright, it's Calill! Nobody's favorite unit. I think Calill just kind of falls under that. I think if Calill wasn't just a traditionally attractive blonde woman in the role of a pretty popular class, I don't think anyone would remember Calill. She's pretty forgettable. Calill is not very good in this game. I'm going to place her in D tier. Not entirely sure where. D tier is getting pretty cluttered. There's a lot of units here for a bunch of different reasons, be it bad availability, bad stats, bad growths, lagoos, point and laugh, or just general some such things. I'm going to go ahead and say she's a little bit better than Ilyana. Not by a whole lot, though. Calill is a very, very straightforward unit. She's pretty much exactly the same as Kieran, Makalov, and Danved, and that her availability is poor. I forgot to even mention Astrid, but well, that's probably better that way. Calill is a sage, also in a game where magic is very, very weak. Very unfortunate. I've said multiple times, and on multiple different occasions, that magic is probably... This is probably the weakest magic has ever been in the series. Because the tomes you're able to use, for the most part, are generally pretty garbage. Like, I want to say Thunder, just the plain old Thunder tome at base has like 2 might. The Light tome has 1 might. Like, the Fire tome I think has 4 might. And that's all just absolutely abhorrently garbage. It's really embarrassing. I have no idea why they decided to nerf magic so heavily from Path of Radiance to Radiant Dawn. It's really weird. And in addition to that, sages have really terrible caps. Like, really, really bad. I want to say female sage has a speed cap of like 23 or 24, which is really unfortunately low. Now, I will go over what Calill does a little bit. Does she even do it a little bit better than the Crimean Knights? Because her availability is basically the same. She doesn't appear in Geoffrey's charge like the other knights, but she will appear in 3.9 and then join the Greil Mercenaries from 3.11 onwards, yada 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 yada. But she will appear in 2 endgame, where she will join with a pretty good inventory for the most part, because she joins with a Meteor, which is always nice. And I will admit, Siege Tomes are pretty much always going to be good. They're actually very good in Radiant Dawn, because it's really, really easy to counteract weapon weight in this game. And it is completely doable to double with siege weapons in this game, which is completely fucking busted. Just having the ability to do a ×2 with a reasonably... Like, I want to say the Meteor has like 6 or 7 might, which is like okay. and it can be effective against Lagoos, and the potential of having a 3 to 10 effective weapon, regardless of might, is pretty fucking absurd. And that being said, it is only 5 uses, and if you want to get another one, you have to wait quite a while. She will get another one eventually. I believe Tormod rejoins with one, or joins with one when he rejoins in part 4, but that's a long fucking way off. And yeah, you can bless it in the tower and give it infinite uses, yada yada yada. It's gimmicky. Don't do that. What does Calill do well? She's reasonably helpful in 2E. She's not the strongest unit, but she can do reasonably good chip damage. She can hold ledges reasonably well, but there's also like a lot of other units that can do that, so it's not a particularly unique niche that she fills. Her base stats are okay. Again, like a lot of the other previous units, she's very much an all-rounder unit. She does not excel in any areas. And this also kind of carries over to her growths, because while her growths aren't bad, I think for the most part, I think her only bad growths are defense and HP, which makes her somewhat of a glass cannon, but you aren't frontlining with mages anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. She actually has pretty decent growths in speed, magic, and skill. Like 45 magic is a little bit low, but 55 speed and 60 skill is perfectly good. And her base strength is high enough to the point where she'll counteract most of the weapon weight from the weapons she's using. And I would say she is a fire sage, and I would go so far as to say fire is the best magic type in the game, but it's not like, that's not a particularly high bar. That's like saying, I don't even know. It's like saying, I don't know, it's like saying gonorrhea is the best STD because it's the least embarrassing. They're all fucking awful. What is the most embarrassing STI? Comment now. What's your favorite STI? Anyway, yeah, no, fire is the best tome in my opinion, just because it is effective against the most common type of enemy, which is plain old Lagoos. Wind is effective against flyers, which aren't particularly common. And Thunder, while effective against wyverns, which can be nice, its might is so pathetically low that it basically doesn't matter. And I would go so far as to say that the Rex Flame is probably the best double S weapon, or the best double S tome, I should establish. There are much better double S weapons, because the Rex Flame gives you +3 speed, and from recency bias, I used Calill on my most recent run. I gave her Paragon, I leveled her up all the way, and she leveled up perfectly fine. She capped a lot of stats, but that's not really that meaningful because sage caps are so absurdly low. She didn't do that much, she didn't double that much, but she was dealing reasonable chunks of damage, but she wasn't doing anything that a better mage wouldn't do, like Soren. Soren's a better mage. Soren's probably the strongest mage in the game, and he's still not very good. I wouldn't even consider Micaiah as a mage per se, because she is unlike every other mage in the game in that she gets to use staves from her tier 2 class, which makes her a lot better. If all sages got to use staves from tier 2 instead of having to get to tier 3, they'd all probably jump up a tier. But yeah, I'd say the Rex Flame is a little bit better because it gives her +3 speed, and it lets her have, I want to say the Arch Sage or the Arc Sage speed cap is 32, but with the Rex Flame it's 35, which means that she doubles basically everything in the tower. And with White Tide, yada yada yada, magic number, blah 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 blah, doubling auras. Oh yeah, she also joins with the Nihil skill, which is nice. Nihil, I didn't really comment on it with Nolan. He was the first provider of such a skill, but Nihil's kind of a strange skill in that it does nothing for basically 99% of the game. It basically, yeah, plain and simple, it basically does nothing. It just negates other enemy skills, but enemies don't have skills most of the time, so it's kind of meaningless. But once you get to the tower, it can be a pretty helpful skill against stuff like Deginsia, who has Ire. Ire is like his personal promotional skill. I want to say it's like a 5x crit or something absurd. It basically will just nuke you off the face of the earth. So if you don't have Nihil to counter that, it can be kind of scary to risk I want to say like a skill % chance to just get evaporated. Auras will obviously deal half the damage that you deal to them back to you if you don't have Nihil, which isn't actually the end of the world, but it can be helpful to just nullify that damage. The biggest problem with Calill is just availability bad. It's as simple as that. I'm going to compare Calill to her competitors just real quick. What are her competitors? Her competitors are Ilyana, who has fantastic availability. Ilyana's biggest problem is that her bases are kind of whatever and her growths are kind of poopy, but at the very least, she does have much better availability than Calill. It's a lot easier to invest in Ilyana than it is to invest in Calill. Tormod's lower because his availability is fucking hot garbage, and he's only really useful for like 2 chapters. Bastion, who hasn't appeared yet. Bastion, spoilers, will be worse than Calill, because spoilers, his availability is fucking garbage, and he's kind of a memian in this game. I think people rag on Bastion a bit too hard, like calling him an F tier unit. He's not an F tier unit, but he's certainly fucking bad, but he's not like in the same tier as the 3 fucking stooges down there. And Soren, I believe, is the only other mage. And Soren is much better than Calill. Calill just doesn't do anything particularly special. She has access to fire, she specializes in fire, which is probably the best of the 3 anima types, but it's still not great. She's just very middling. And I'd say if she had better availability, I'd probably stick her in like C tier, but sages are just so fucking bad in Radiant Dawn, man. It's really, really difficult to justify it. Magic is just so weak. Because, again, if I hadn't mentioned this already, enemies actually do have a reasonably good res stat in this game. Like, it's not as high as their defense on average, but it's, like, at a point where they will take very minimal damage from magic weapons. It's not like GBA Fire Emblems, where res just doesn't exist unless you're a unit who's using magic. Like an Armor Knight in fucking FE7 or FE6 would have basically 1 or 0 res the entire time, which is why magic is good in those games, because they at least have a niche to fill. Whereas Armor Knights and Generals in this game, like, have a pretty reasonable res pool. It's actually kind of weird. Generals are very, very, very strong as enemy units in this game, because, like, they're bulky as shit, they have really high HP, really high defense, and you'd expect their other stats to be lower to compensate for the fact that their other stats are really, really high, but, like, their speed and strength and res are all, like, reasonably okay. It's actually surprisingly difficult to double Generals for a lot of units in this game. And Calill is absolutely one of those units that cannot consistently do it, which sucks. Yeah, she's just a unit that doesn't really impress in any front. Very similar to Makalov, very similar to Danved. I'm rating her lower than them on the tier list, despite the fact that she's basically in the same category as them, just because I think she's just that much weaker, just because magic poopy. It's not good. As simple as that. I will also mention this really quick. It's not that important, but magic's super fucking expensive in this game. Like, buying an Elfire Tome is like 3,000 gold. It's absurd. A steel poleaxe is like 600 gold in Radiant Dawn. It's so cheap. And people wonder why Haar is the best unit in the game, because he's super gold efficient too. If you want to level someone like Calill, it's like, oh, I want to level a wind rank for some reason. I'll get her an Arcwind Tome. Holy fuck, it's 4,000 gold. Never mind. Yeah, it's absurd. The weapon economy is completely fucked. The economy's in shambles. How does one group of mercenaries not have 4,000 gold between them? Anyway, Calill, D tier, she's just very weak. She's okay in 2E, but after that, she just falls off. She doesn't do very much in 3.9, and when she rejoins, she's just a pretty weak unit that you probably won't feel. By that point, Soren can probably be an Arcsage. If you are using a mage at that point, you'll probably be using Soren, and he's just better. He has more time to level, he grows a bit better, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter, because Sage Caps are poopy anyway. Yeah, D tier. I can't place her any higher, reasonably. And with that, we're finally halfway through the game. Alright, big round of applause, everyone. We've made it halfway through the game at this point. Part 2 is now finally done. We'll get to Part 3 and Part 4 next time. But for now, this is going to be it. I'm pretty happy with how everything is. How are you doing? You doing good? Make sure you're taking care of yourself, people. Mental health and physical health is very important. But more importantly, keep yourself spiritually fit. I'm going off on a tangent, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave before I say some weird shit. Anyway, Part 3 and Part 4 coming soon. There will be rearrangements at the end of Part 4, so if people are moving around, don't be like weirded out like, oh, why is Heather lower, or why is the Black Knight higher? It's because I'm moving stuff around all the time. Anyway, I'll see you guys next time. Part 3 coming relatively soon, trademark. See you next time, guys.